If you were a light sleeper in Britain from the 1930s onwards, you probably heard it before anything else stirred, that soft electric whir of a milk float coming up your road. The sound was distinctive, almost ghostly really, nothing like a petrol engine. These battery-powered vehicles had been replacing horse-drawn carts for milk deliveries since around 1932, and they made sense for the job. Stop and start, dozens of times each street, no stalling or grinding gears to wake the entire neighborhood. The electric motor just hummed along quietly at maybe 6 or 7 miles per hour. Then came the secondary noise, the one that really marked the moment, the clink and rattle of glass bottles in their metal crates as the milkman hopped out. He would grab a pint or two, sometimes more, depending what each household had ordered, and set them on the doorstep. The bottles had foiled tops, silver for ordinary milk, gold for the creamy stuff. You would lie there half awake listening to this ritual move from house to house, the mechanical whine and brake clunk, the bottle chink footsteps, then the whir again as the float moved on. By the time you got up properly, your milk was waiting outside, still cold from the morning air, ready to go straight onto your cornflakes or into your tea. Before mobiles, making a call meant finding a red phone box and having the right coins. Local calls cost 4p, 4 old pennies, and you needed them ready before you even picked up the handset. The routine was simple enough. You lifted the receiver, heard the dialing tone, then fed your coins into the slot at the top of the black metal box beneath the phone. After dialing the number on that clunky rotary dial, you waited for someone to answer. When they did, you pressed button A and your coins dropped with a loud clatter into the guts of the machine. Now you could actually speak. If no one answered, you pressed button B instead and got your money back down a little chute. Kids made pocket money by checking button B in every phone box they passed, hoping the last caller had forgotten to collect their change. If your call went on too long, you would hear the pips, a series of rapid beeps warning you to feed in more coins or get cut off. Those pips became a signal people used deliberately. You could ring home, say your name as the pip started, then hang up. Your mum knew to come pick you up from the station. Emergency calls to 999 were free, and directory inquiries cost nothing either. The boxes themselves often reeked of stale cigarettes, or worse, the glass was frequently smashed and the phone directories were usually missing or destroyed. But they worked mostly, and that was what mattered. The sound starts quietly, just a faint hiss and crackle as the heating element warms the water at the bottom. Those first tiny bubbles form on the hot metal surface and immediately collapse as they hit the cooler water above, creating miniature implosions you can barely hear. But then the real performance begins. As the water gets hotter, the kettle enters what's called nucleate boiling, and this is where things get loud. Larger bubbles form continuously on the heating element, rising through the water like an underwater volcano. Each bubble that forms and collapses sends out a small shockwave. When you've got hundreds of them happening every second, you get that familiar building rumble. The kettle essentially turns itself into a resonating chamber, amplifying the sound through its metal body. In a whistling kettle, the crescendo arrives when steam pressure builds enough to force its way through the narrow spout opening. The steam bends a thin piece of metal back and forth hundreds of times per second, creating that piercing note. That whistle became the universal signal for tea time in British households throughout the 20th century. Even people who'd grown up with electric kettles knew that sound from their grandparents' kitchens. It wasn't just noise, it was the promise of a hot cup of tea, a break in the day, a reason to gather in the kitchen. The kettle's rising rumble and final whistle became as much a part of British domestic life as the chiming of a clock. Television in Britain used to actually stop at night, and when it did, there was a whole ritual to it. Around midnight or just after, you'd get what was called the close-down sequence. On BBC One, this typically started with a rundown of tomorrow evening's programmes, then the national weather forecast, maybe a public information film if it was a weekday, and a closing announcement from the continuity announcer wishing you good night and pointing you towards BBC Radio still on through the night. This announcement was made over the station clock, which you'd watch tick along for 30 to 45 seconds. Then the national anthem played out over the BBC ident. ITV regions did something similar, though many played God Save the Queen over footage of the royal family rather than just their logo. After the anthem, the screen faded to a dark green or dark grey raster. What happened next varied. Sometimes it was just that dark picture until the transmitter switched off 10 minutes later. Other times you'd get test cards with tone or still pictures with engineering test overlaid or pulse and bar patterns. Some stations gave the famous reminder, don't forget to switch off your television set. This was genuinely important because older sets risked overheating and catching fire if left on. Then came the little white dot, a phosphor trace that lingered as the electron gun powered down, slowly shrinking until it disappeared. After that, nothing but static hiss and darkness. That sharp metallic clang was the sound that ran Victorian schools and kept running them for over a century after. The bell told you when to arrive, when to sit down, when you could finally escape to the playground, and when your day was done. It was mechanical authority made audible, a brass or iron contraption that ruled pupils' lives more firmly than any head teacher's glare. Early on, it was simple enough. Teachers in the 1800s used handbells, ringing them outside the one-room schoolhouse to summon children in for lessons. Later, when bigger school buildings went up during the Common School movement, reformers like Horace Mann insisted every school should have a proper bell, where the expense could be afforded, that is. The bell ensured punctuality, and punctuality was essential to the orderly running of education. Things changed around 1908 when a superintendent named William Wirt introduced what he called the Work-Study-Play School in Gary, Indiana. His innovation involved moving pupils from room to room for different subjects when the bell rang, not just at the start and end of the day. Suddenly, bells were carving the day into chunks, dictating when mathematics ended and music began. By the 1960s, most schools had wired up electric bell systems and public address units. The teacher no longer had to watch the clock. The bell dismissed the class itself, its ring cutting through whatever sentence was being spoken. If you rode London buses in the mid-20th century, you knew that ding-ding sound inside out. It was the conductor's bell, and it ran the whole show. Unlike modern buses where the driver does everything, these older buses had the driver sealed away in his own little compartment at the front. He couldn't see what was happening behind him, and the conductor couldn't shout loud enough over the engine, so they communicated through a mechanical bell. A cord ran along the ceiling of the bus, strung halfway over the left seats. When you tugged it, a clapper struck and the sound rang out clear enough for everyone to hear. The signals were simple. One ring meant a passenger wanted off at the next stop, though school kids couldn't resist pulling it for a laugh. Two rings, and that was the conductor telling the driver everyone's on board, move off now. Three rings meant either cancel that last instruction or the bus is full, so don't stop. Every regular passenger knew the routine by heart. The conductor would call out hold tight and then ding ding, and off you went. The engine itself had this odd automatic transmission that gave it a distinct whine that changed with speed, plus you'd hear the squeal of the brakes at every stop. That whole soundscape, bell and engine and all, it was just part of getting about town. The soundtrack of playtime was simple enough. That constant thud of a ball against tarmac, repeated every few seconds as someone tried to keep it under control or launched it toward a mate. You'd hear it echo off brick walls when kids practiced shooting, that sharp crack when the ball hit just right. The bounce back was hollow sounding. The best noise was when someone absolutely levered it and you got that proper whoomp sound, especially with an old leather ball that had weight to it. Plastic balls made a tinny sort of ping instead, almost musical if you listened close. Then there were the metallic rattles when the ball smacked into railings, sending vibrations through the whole fence. Windows took the worst of it, that terrifying smash rattle when someone miscalculated and sent the ball toward the building. Most times it just thudded against brick, but occasionally you'd hear that distinct crash of glass and everything would go silent for about 2 seconds. The dragging sound of jackets being pulled across concrete to mark goalposts happened at the start of every game. Cars added their contribution when the ball rolled into the road. The honk, the screech of brakes, sometimes a thump, and underlying everything was the constant patter of trainers on tarmac, dozens of feet chasing after one ball. You'd hear the occasional yelp when someone took a boot to the shin. The bell ringing meant nothing for the first minute. The thudding continuing until a teacher showed up. Nobody wanted it to end. Walk into any shop today and you get the familiar bleep of the barcode scanner, a digital chirp when you tap your card, maybe a quiet whir from the receipt printer. 30 or 40 years ago, the whole experience was completely different, much louder and more mechanical. The old-fashioned till, the kind with actual keys you had to punch down, made quite the racket. The cashier would slam each key as they rang up your shopping, often calling out the price as they went so you could hear what you were being charged. You'd get this rapid succession of clicks and clunks as the metal keys dropped and the internal gears started turning. Inside, the machine numbers would physically rotate into position on little wheels, all grinding away. Then came the grand finale, the bit everyone remembers, that satisfying cha-ching as the drawer sprang open and a bell rang to announce the sale had been recorded. Some tills had 2 drawers, one for each member of staff, and each drawer had its own distinct bell note. The whole transaction was a proper performance, a symphony of mechanical sounds that let everyone in the shop know business was being done. It was substantial, solid, something you could hear happening. Modern tills are quieter, faster, more efficient, obviously, but they've lost that unmistakable metallic flourish that said your money had officially changed hands. You press eject, and the first thing you hear is that motorized whir starting up inside the machine, not a smooth electric hum, but something chunky and mechanical with interlocking plastic gears grinding away. The VCR has to retract all those loading posts and roller guides that pulled the tape out of the cassette shell and wrapped it around the spinning head drum. You can hear the sequence happening in stages, first the higher-pitched whine of the tape being wound back into its shell, then a deeper rumbling as the mechanism folds everything back into place. The whole process takes maybe 4 or 5 seconds, and during that time, you're hearing multiple motors and actuators overlapping into this dense mechanical symphony. Then comes the finale, that satisfying clunk as the cassette is physically lifted up and pushed towards you. It's a proper mechanical thud transmitted through the entire chassis of the machine. You feel it as much as hear it. The cassette appears in the slot and the motor's cut out. That clunk was your signal to grab the tape and check whether you'd remembered to rewind it, because the rental place would charge you if you hadn't. With rental tapes, this moment was loaded with strange significance. Had you recorded over something by mistake? Was there something embarrassing on there from last week that you'd forgotten about? The eject clunk was a portal back to whatever was stored on that magnetic tape. Blockbuster stickers on the shell, handwritten labels in fading biro tapes that had been through 25 different machines. They still worked somehow. Walk into a bank or an arcade in the 70s or 80s and you'd hear this rapid metallic clatter, almost like a mechanical rainstorm of coins. That was the counter doing its job, sorting through handfuls of loose change at impressive speed. These machines had a flat spinning disc at the bottom of a bowl that would distribute coins around the rim, funneling them one by one through a narrow opening just wide enough for a single coin. As each coin passed through, it would strike against metal guides, trigger a spring-loaded cam, or drop through a light beam counter, creating that distinctive rattling cascade. The sound was relentless when the machine ran full bore, a percussion of copper, nickel, and silver all clattering against the metal innards. Different denominations made slightly different pitches as they moved through the mechanism. So you'd get this layered metallic symphony if someone dumped in a jar of mixed change. Shops used simpler models that just counted pre-sorted coins, while banks had more sophisticated machines that could sort and count different denominations simultaneously. The really impressive ones could process 300 coins per minute, which meant that rattle was nearly continuous once you tipped your collection into the hopper. Cashiers in busy shops would run these things constantly at closing time, counting up the day's takings in a metallic chorus. These days, most transactions are card or contactless, so there's simply less loose change floating around to be counted. The coin counters still exist in some supermarkets and banks, but you're far more likely to hear the electronic beep of a card reader than that old rattling music. Before loudspeakers and before most people could read, if you wanted to sell something on the street, you had to shout about it. But not just any shouting would do. With dozens of traders competing for attention in crowded markets and busy streets, vendors developed their own signature calls known as street cries. These were half-spoken, half-sung phrases that each trader would repeat over and over, turning their sales pitch into a kind of melody that people could recognize from a distance. A fish seller might call out mackerels, 8 a shilling in a rising and falling pattern, whilst a lavender seller had her own tune for sweet blooming lavender, 6 pence a bunch. The cries changed throughout the day and with the seasons. Early morning, you might hear the milkwoman, midday the pie man, evening the muffin seller wandering the streets. Come summer, the strawberry girls appeared, winter brought the hot chestnut vendors. Each trade had its own sound, and each trader tried to put their own spin on it to stand out. Some added witty verses, some threw in riddles, others just bellowed louder than their neighbors. The result was that every market, neighborhood, and estate developed its own distinctive acoustic signature. You could tell where you were just by listening to which cries filled the air. This went on for centuries, right up until motor traffic and modern regulations gradually drowned them out from the 1900s onwards. The sound cuts through a summer afternoon like nothing else. A tinny, slightly warped melody drifting down the street. Maybe Greensleeves or some other simple tune you've heard 1,000 times. It's the ice cream van, and if you're a kid playing outside, you know you've got maybe 2 minutes before it moves to the next street. That jingle isn't just music, it's a signal, a call to action. Within seconds of hearing it, children appear from gardens and houses, sprinting toward the source of the sound with whatever coins they've managed to grab. Pure Pavlovian response. Really, the tune gets into your head, links itself to the promise of a cold treat on a hot day. Ice cream vans started using these jingles back in the 1950s when mechanical music boxes replaced the simple bells that early vendors used. The music needed to be loud enough to be heard from inside houses, but still recognizable through the crackle of cheap speakers. That's why the tunes are so distinctive, so repetitive. They had to punch through the everyday noise of residential streets. These days, there are regulations about how long the jingle can play, usually around 12 seconds at a time, and when it can be used, but the effect is still the same. You hear that melody, and suddenly you want ice cream. It's that simple.